people in. There we go. All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to another event for the Maryland STEM Festival. Before we go into our presentation, just a couple quick housekeeping notes. First, if you would like to send information, tweet, post anything during the event, our hashtag is MDSTEMFest. And at the end of the event, I'm going to post a link to our survey, and we'd appreciate if you'd complete our survey, let us know what you thought of this program. So today we have a very special program to kind of top off a very NASA and very space heavy week. We started on Monday. We had NASA photographer Christopher Gunn talking about his career. On Tuesday, we watched with everyone else the amazing venture to the asteroid and the collection of materials, and I want to congratulate NASA on that very successful mission. On Wednesday, we had astronaut Ricky Arnold, who graduated from my high school in Bowie, Maryland, and he joined us and chatted. We also had several women from Huntsville talking about 3D printing and manufacturing in space, something I'm sure a lot of people have never thought about. And yesterday, we had a woman from a company called Astroscale talking about careers in space. And we're wrapping off this week talking about possibly the greatest accomplishment in space to date, the building of the International Space Station, a marvelous machine that is truly a world effort. And I have with me today Ansley Browns from NASA and William Lytle from Lockheed Martin. And we're going to be talking about the space station, which is coming up on its 20th anniversary of continuous, yes, this is what I wanted to share. Yes, which is coming up on its 20th anniversary of continuous operation or continuous life in space. And one thing I really like is they have a clock with a countdown to that 20th anniversary. So we're a little bit more than 9.5 days away. And of course, you get highlights of what's currently going on in the space station. A few of us were actually up at 1 a.m. last week watching astronaut Katie Rubins and 2 cosmonauts launch from Russia to the space station. I always find those amazing, and I took the time to stay up and watch that. But today we're going to focus on the space station and different elements and different components of the space station. So we're going to start by talking about the design of space stations and spacecraft in general, because it's a very complex issue and a very complex task. There's a lot of things that have to be considered when you are creating a vehicle that humans will participate in or will use, because of course we need to breathe, and you have to consider our mobility and the effect of gravity. So Bill and Ashley are going to talk a little bit about the design of space stations, spacecrafts. And Bill, let me see if I can pull up your little PowerPoint, because Bill has something that he would like to share with us. All right.
Yeah, basically, so you know who I am, where I'm coming from. Name's Bill Lytle. I'm a human factors engineer, and a lot of people wonder, well, what is that? And basically, I'm concerned with how people use things. So engineers make things so they can work, and human factors engineers look at how people will use them. And so like the space station, yeah, it's a phenomenal machine, but people have to operate it and perform science in it and do things. So we look at what we call human systems integration. How do people fit into the station and operate it safely and efficiently? How did I get into this? Well, when I was a teenager, I had a motorcycle accident and broke both my hands. And all of a sudden, things that you take for granted, like opening doors and getting dressed, suddenly became difficult. So I started looking at, well, how do people do things? And it ultimately led, if you look at the bottom left-hand picture, I started out designing custom seating for quadriplegics, people who cannot use their arms and legs, and some of them can't even breathe. But they have to function in this world. So how do we enable them to function? And just like on the space station, the astronauts are in microgravity, so their world is different. We have to design things so that they can function and use them. So that's how I got into this. I'm out here in Colorado and it is cold, but if you like mountains and cold, it's a great place to be. I work for Lockheed Martin Space. How did I get here? I started out in the medical device field, but I've always been curious. How do people do things? Like, how do the astronauts, perform science on the station? How do deep sea explorers find things at the bottom of the ocean? And so wherever people are trying to do things in extreme environments, I'm like, well, how do they do it? And how can we help them do it safer and more efficiently? Just a little bit about me. Yeah, like Ansley, I love to travel around the world. Something about mountains and climbing them, and especially volcanoes, whether it's Iceland, New Zealand, Hawaii. Fascinated by how the earth creates things. Also spent 10 years helping rescue people off of mountains. Next slide.
Oops, sorry about that. Let me.
Okay. Just some more pictures. I don't know if your screen is truncated, but basically human factors engineering. And jokingly, I tell people my job is to put the man in the can. And whether it's in space shuttles, Orion, the space shuttle replacement. I did a project for the National Oceanographic Institute for a deep sea submersible. How do we help scientists at the bottom of the ocean? At the bottom right, you can see a habitat mock-up for a cislunar habitat, which is one of the things NASA's looking at. I've also worked on Mars landers, lunar landers. The orbital space plane you see in the middle on the right, that was a shuttle replacement concept before they went to Orion. We'll also talk about new technology like virtual reality and augmented reality and how we use that to put people in the situation in the computer, as opposed to building mock-ups and having people climb in mock-ups. We actually put people into the computer via augmented and virtual reality. Real quick, seeing as we're mainly on manufacturing, a sidebar to human factors engineering is what we call DFX, which stands for Design for X, where X is producibility, manufacturability, operability, maintainability. You start thinking, as you design, you start thinking, how are people going to interface with this all throughout the process? How are they going to actually build it? And as Phil brought it up earlier, 3D printing, which you see in the upper middle picture, that's part of a fuel tank dome, and that was printed out of titanium, which is pretty miraculous that you can just program a computer and say, I want a dome for a tank, and it will produce it instead of having to hog it out from metal. But when you start designing things, you start thinking about, well, how can we make this easier on the people? How can we make it so they can put things together easier? And you can look at the very middle picture, and that is two engineers looking through HoloLenses, and that projects what needs to be done where on the objects, so that you don't have to have all these manuals and instructions. You just put on your glasses and it tells you what to do and where to do it. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Phil so we can get on with the program.
So yes, as you said, your background is in human design. So, and this question for both of you to put, when you do start at the very beginning, at ground zero, designing a spacecraft for human use and livability, what are the very first things you consider? What are the first things you need to look at?
Well, I mean, Ansley's an engineer, and I don't know a single engineer that won't ask, where are my requirements?
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, you have to know everything, if it's space, you have to know the requirements. It has to survive, uh, microgravity. It has to survive really hot temperatures because the sun, you don't have the clouds in the atmosphere to protect you from the sun. So you get really hot. And when you're on the shaded side of the earth, it gets really cold. So, I mean, down the list, and I'll let Ainsley chime in on the rest of it.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'm excited to be talking with you guys today. So I think certainly when you're talking about designing a spacecraft, weight is always a factor. How heavy is the spacecraft? Because you have to get it into orbit. But when it comes to putting people inside that spacecraft, it's a whole different level of requirements and constraints, like Bill mentioned. We have to have air for the people inside the spacecraft to breathe. We have to have seats to cushion them during launch and during landing, taking into effect the consumables they need. So you have to have space for food and for water. And of course, the question that everyone always asks, how do you go to the bathroom in space? You got to account for all the things that we think about taking care of when we're here on Earth, and putting that into the spacecraft. So lots of different things come into play when you're at that initial design. And one thing that can be really helpful to think about is not only what all you need, but how it's going to be used.
Mm-hmm.
And what your objective is for your mission. For example, if you're going to the moon, that's a lot closer than, say, going to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're putting into your spacecraft might be a little bit different. You might think about those things differently. For the International Space Station, of course, it's been flying for, like you said, the initial piece has actually been flying for over 20 years, but it's been continuously crewed for almost 20 years. So again, that's a different destination than going farther away. So we think about things a little bit differently, how often we need to be resupplied versus if you're going to Mars, you aren't going to resupply anything. You got to take everything with you to start with. So that all comes into play when you're initially thinking about what kind of spacecraft you're going to design.
Mm-hmm. And at what part in the process do you start bringing people to test what you've built or designed?
So I think that kind of depends on what kind of spacecraft you're designing. Certainly for different components, you want to test those early to make sure, if you're designing, for example, a new toilet, you want to make sure that works to start with. And then the farther you go, you start doing more integrated testing, where instead of just the one system, you want to make sure the systems work together correctly. For example, they all probably are going to need power. So you got to make sure that your spacecraft has enough power that it's going to generate, likely from solar arrays, that's going to come together. And when you put those systems together, there's enough power to power all of them at the same time, and not necessarily just one at a time. So you start out testing pieces, and then the more you put it together, you do the integrated testing to make sure it all works together.
Yeah,
and of course,
I want to chime in because I know Ansley was with the astronaut office, and when we're working with NASA designing something, you design, whether it's a capsule to carry astronauts or a habitat. Yeah, the engineers put their, get together and they take all the lessons, especially from the space station, and put it in what they've learned into this new habitat. But that's how the engineers think. The best thing that any designer can do is you bring in the end users. And so we would always reach out to the astronauts and say, okay, we're building this for you to live in for 90 days on the far side of the moon. What do you think? And because a lot of the astronauts who've been on the space station, they have a lot of information. They know a lot of little lessons learned is what the term we use. They know a lot that a lot of engineers that live on the earth don't think about. And so they will help the designers by pointing out, well, that's nice, but it'd be better if we moved it over here so we could use it easier.
Well, of course, you want to use the knowledge that they've gained because there's no point reinventing the wheel. I mean, you want to use what they've done. Is there any components or any elements in the design phase that from project to project is always the worst and always the most challenging? Or is it all just difficult?
I'll let Ansley speak to that. I'll let her go first. I do know that it was brought up, the toilet that has been pretty much the bane of astronauts. I actually, because I'm an older guy, I actually know some Apollo astronauts, and a lot of them brag that they didn't, that they minimized the use of the bags because they didn't have toilets in Apollo. I don't know whether I'm proud to say or sad to say that I actually know the throughput of the shuttle toilet, how much it can handle and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, just dealing with people in all the systems involving people, it gets complicated and messy. I mean, food, I mean, how to rehydrate, how to warm it, and every bit of what, I mean, everything associated with people turns out to be more than you think it's going to be.
And getting back to the throughput of the toilet system, it might not sound exciting, but it is critical to people working well in space. And it ties very much into Ashley's comment about weight, about how much weight goes into your design and trying to minimize weight. And I think actually one of the women on the call Wednesday said each pound costs an extra $300,000. So you want to try to reduce, obviously, as Ashley mentioned, as much weight to save money and to use that money on something else.
Absolutely. And I think when you get into that, from moving it from design into, all right, let's go build it, let's see how it's really going to work. When you're talking about things like weight, integrated power, I think that can be really challenging, moving from the idea stage and you think it's going to work. You have this great idea and you know exactly how it's going to work. And when you get into actually building it and integrating it, that can start to drive. Sometimes it didn't work exactly the way you thought it might, integrated with other pieces. So bringing it together can be both really exciting because that means you're getting to the end, close to the end stage, but that can also lead to lots more discussions about making sure everything's working not only individually, but again, all together correctly.
Yeah.
And I think NASA just tested a new toilet, didn't they?
There actually is a new toilet that's on the space station. It launched recently, and that was one of the projects that I actually helped work on several years ago when I was in the astronaut office. So it'll be installed here in the next couple of months, and then it'll be tested out both for use on the space station, but also that will be used for testing to fly on the Orion spacecraft.
Bill, I think you're going to add something.
Yeah, dealing with weight, and I don't know if Ansley, the groups that she's worked with, but there was one group, and Ansley knows this, whenever you send something up into space, especially for the people, you got to package it really well. So that's a lot of extra weight. And, bubble wrap is great, but even bubble wrap weighs something. So there were some people who actually looked at taking all the packing material and this was for Mars, once you got to Mars, and you basically melt it down and make plastic furniture out of it. So you don't have to take furniture to Mars. You just have to unpack everything and melt down the packing to make your own furniture. And so it's creative thinking like that you have your requirement. Okay, once people are going to need to sit down and do things, well, they're going to need furniture. Well, we don't want to take the furniture because it weighs a lot. So why don't we make it? Well, sending all the material to make it's going to cost a lot. Well, oh, hey, by the way, we have all this packing material that we're going to send anyway. Let's use that. So to Ansley's point, using the weight that you launch wisely is great challenge.
Absolutely. Now, Ansley has a wonderful model of the space station behind her, and that's going to lead us to our next topic is the assembly of the the International Space Station, which was a endeavor never before performed for essentially, and it was done and it was quite a project. So I'd like to start talking about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So the first component of the space station itself in its current configuration is a little bit different than the way that we initially conceived it several years, well, many years ago. It's actually the concept of a space station really goes back to the 70s. Skylab was America's first space station, where we flew 3 astronauts at a time for first a couple of weeks and then a couple of months. But in the 80s, we had started talking about having a space station more permanently to fly for longer periods of time. And again, that design process takes time. There's always what else is going on in the world and in the national discussion about what priorities should be. And in the 90s, we transitioned to an international space station, coordinating with our Russian colleagues who have been flying people in space a long time as well, and actually became an international endeavor with several different countries. And the first component was launched in 1998. So I have some slides I'm happy to
absolutely, yes,
to share and talk you through.
Certainly, we want to learn.
All right. All that are in space right now, but these are different pictures taken when they were in development here on the ground. And you'll notice they came from several different places all around the world.
We're not seeing anything, Ashley. Ansley, I'm sorry, Ansley, we're not seeing anything.
See. Well, I'll try it again.
Okay.
You got it?
Yes.
All right. So these different components built all around the world and all launched and assembled on orbit. And one of the things that I personally think is pretty amazing about the construction of the space station is they were not put together on the ground. There was no fit check beforehand. We launched all of this hardware and it all fit right because we worked towards our requirements together. So you'll see that several of the components they look like long tubes. And again, talking about the design and development, when we were thinking about how to launch these, a lot of components were launched in the space shuttle payload bay. So the width of these modules was designed to fit inside the shuttle's payload bay. And here in the lower right, you'll see the Kibo module, the Japanese laboratory. It's actually the largest component on the space station. And it was designed, the Japanese wanted a large laboratory, and they designed it to fit inside this, to be long enough, almost as long as the payload bay itself. And I've heard stories that it was so long that it just had inches to spare on the front and in the back inside the payload bay when it was launched. So again, in these pictures, you see the different components on the ground getting ready to launch. And then the first component was again launched in 1998. This picture on the left shows the Zarya module launched from Kazakhstan on November 20th, 1998. And then a couple of weeks later, a space shuttle launched from Florida carrying the Unity node and rendezvoused with the Zarya module. That's what it looked like on the lower left in orbit. And then early December, the space shuttle rendezvoused and captured that Zarya module and docked together. And that was the first piece of the space station being built. So it took a couple of years to add some more components, start outfitting the space station to carry people. And then we got to November 2nd, 1998 is when the first International Space Station crew arrived. And their picture here. The first commander was Bill Shepard in the middle, a US astronaut. And this picture on the right shows you what the space station looked like when they first arrived. So just a few components. Remember what that picture looked like as we go through, and you'll see how much bigger it's gotten now.
So, Ansley, I have a question.
Yes.
So when those first initial components were launched, what kept them from floating in space? I mean, were they launched it looks like the launch was close, but it didn't seem like it was simultaneously. So how were they interconnected?
It's a great question. So for those components, the first two, the Zarya module was launched from Kazakhstan on a Russian rocket, and it was uncrewed. So it got into orbit, and then the space shuttle launched a couple of days later into a particular orbit to meet up with that spacecraft, with the Zarya module, the Russian module in orbit. So it's a carefully planned, not only engineering feat, but also physics and math computations as well go into all that to make sure that we're launching the space shuttle into the right orbit so that it can catch up to that other component that was already launched ahead of time.
And was there any guidance system on those two components when they combined, so they wouldn't just randomly, float away?
Absolutely. The space that was one of the unique things about the space shuttle, being able to launch into several different types of orbits. We could schedule the orbit the way that to meet up with that Russian segment. And then the other segment, that component that launched ahead of time, it definitely had a guidance system as well to know where it was, to share that information so that they could come together and meet in the same spot. That's a key part of flying in space, is knowing where you are and where you're going. And both the Russians and NASA have worked really hard to make sure that we share that information correctly so that we know where we are and where we're going.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah. So I have a video. Let's see, Phil, are you seeing my screen again?
I am seeing your screen.
All right. So I'm going to talk you guys through this video that shows how the International Space Station was assembled. So there's that first component. The next component came up. And as we go through this, it's going pretty quickly, but you can see how quickly the space station grew as we added all of these different modules. The ones that are being shown now all launched on a space shuttle. So we had many different space shuttle missions over many years. If you look on the lower left, you can see the years that those missions were flown. And it's a modular development. So, if you guys like to play with Legos at home or different models and you put the pieces together, space station was built just like that, only circling the Earth about 250 miles up, orbiting the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. So lots of different pieces going up. You see the solar arrays being extended. That was another design component. We had to have big solar arrays to power all of the systems on the space station. And the way that we launched them, as you can see here, they were folded up and then got the truss would get installed that holds that solar array, and then they were expanded out. So you can see the various components were almost to the end where it is today. And as we get that final solar array on, this whole thing is the size of a football field now. So we went from the size at the very beginning, a couple of school buses, to now we're the size of a football field across those arrays. And this shows you essentially, coming up on the end, this is what the space station looks like now. So the habitable volume, that is where the astronauts can live and work and exercise, and is all in those round circular modules. And that's about the volume of a 5-bedroom house. So it's gotten much bigger than it was when we started. And if I go on, this is what it looks like now. So this picture was taken in May of 2011, right at the end of the shuttle program after we had completed the space station. But it basically looks the same now. And again, that whole thing is the size of a football field. And it's been continuously crewed since November of 2000. So I like to tell people, if we've got any kids watching that were born after November 2nd of 2000, or you can tell your children, grandchildren, they've never lived on planet Earth when the entire human population has been on Earth. We've always had at least 2 people from Earth living in the space station orbiting the Earth ever since November of 2000. And it's really exciting to be coming up on that next, that anniversary.
Yes. Yes. Now, I understand you have a presentation, Ashley?
Yes.
So, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So this slide here Can you guys see the map that I'm showing?
Yes.
Yeah, so this map shows you right now where all of the sites are around the world that are dealing with operating and managing this International Space Station, to give you a flavor for where we're working with people again all over the world. And there's other places besides the ones that are shown here that help build the different components of the space station. So we need lots of different types of people, not only engineers to work at NASA to help with the space station, but also all sorts of folks to help us interface with these people all around the world to make sure that our space station is safe and our astronauts are safe. And speaking of astronauts, I'd like to show this slide to you. This gives you a flavor for where all around the world people have flown to the space station from.
Mhm.
So everyone has either launched from Kazakhstan on a Russian Soyuz rocket or from the United States on this space shuttle. But we've had astronauts from literally all over the world visit and work on the space station.
That answered a question of mine. I was going to ask if any of the other countries that built the components launched their parts, but you just said that it was only Russia and the United States that actually launched the components.
So actually, only Russia and the United States have launched people, but the Japanese and the Europeans both built cargo spaceships that have taken components to the space station as well as cargo and supplies. Right now, we have a couple of different vehicles that launch to the space station. We've got 2 U.S. companies that launch cargo ships to the space station, SpaceX and Northrop Grumman. And then the Japanese also have a spacecraft called the HTV, the H2 transfer vehicle, that also launches, and they actually do launch from Japan. So speaking of the design, one of the things that we had to consider when we picked the orbit of the space station is we were going to have people launch from all over the world. So we had to pick an orbit that all of those launch sites could reach. And that drove the orbit selection of how we were going to fly space station. I did want to show the folks that are living up there right now. You mentioned Dr. Kate Rubins. This is her second time to fly on the International Space Station. And just a few days ago, we had Chris Cassidy, a U.S. astronaut, return from the space station. He and his 2 Russian crewmates had been up there for about 6 months. And Kate and her Russian colleagues will be up there for another 5 to 6 months. So you'll see that spacesuits that they're sitting in are Russian spacesuits because they launched on a Russian rocket called Soyuz. This is a picture of a Russian Soyuz rocket launch out of Kazakhstan. A cool thing about that, the Russians launch their Soyuz rockets on the same launch pad that Yuri Gagarin, very first person that went to space, launched in. It takes anywhere from a couple of orbits to 2 days to get to the space station on Soyuz. And this is a picture of what that Soyuz capsule looks like when it gets to the space station. So that big, tall rocket, most of that was fuel, again, to be able to launch this component up to space station. And the astronauts sit in this component. They go all the way up through this tunnel and into the space station here. And this picture shows you just how tight it is. So again, this particular spacecraft was designed not for the astronauts to work for a long period of time, but to get them safely into orbit. So it's pretty small to, again, minimize that weight to get into space.
And you said I'm sorry, you said they'll be in that craft up to 2 days?
Yes. Typically, we set up the orbit for launch. Now it's usually more like 4 to 6 hours. But again, depending on how we plan things out, it can be up to 2 days in that spacecraft.
Yeah, and just to clarify, they launch in the capsule in case they have to abort. Once they get on orbit, they get out of the capsule and go into the other part of the Soyuz. There's 2 pieces that are joined together. However, only the capsule is strong enough to do re-entry, which Ansley's showing right now. But the capsule is so small, like Ansley said, to minimize weight, that the cosmonauts or astronauts actually have a strap that they put under their legs and hook so that they can hold their legs up and make themselves smaller and fit into the seats more comfortably.
So based on the design of a capsule of that size, the astronauts, there are certain requirements. Someone can't be a certain size and be an astronaut.
Yeah, I doubt most NBA players would be able to be astronauts. Useless trivia, but the original 7 for the Americans,
Right, the
most of
Mercury
them,
7.
yeah, the Mercury 7 astronauts, most of them were around 5'8" because they
Mhm.
were fighter pilots, and military aircraft were designed for very small people.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So this picture shows that one piece that comes back from on the Soyuz. They land in Kazakhstan on the ground. So you'll see there's a big parachute that slows them down, and then this is everything's totally normal in this landing. This just shows you there's some little jets at the bottom of the rocket that fire right before it lands to cushion the spacecraft as it lands. And this is actually a picture of Chris Cassidy on his first flight returning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're so used to seeing capsules land in the water. Do all capsules land on land now?
It's a great question and excellent segue. Thank you. So the Russian Soyuz lands on the ground. The space shuttle used to land like an airplane.
Right.
But the new capsules that we're developing, working alongside several partners, some of them land on land and some of them land in the water. So the next launch that's planned to the space station to take people will be the first official crew mission with the new commercial crew program, launching on a SpaceX capsule. You'll see these 4 astronauts here will be launching hopefully mid-November to the space station for a long duration mission. And this will be that's going to be really the first operational flight of the SpaceX Crew Dragon. Our first demo mission with astronauts aboard the Crew Dragon occurred earlier this year. You guys may have seen that news and seen Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley launching on a SpaceX rocket in the SpaceX capsule. These are a couple pictures I pulled from their mission. You can see the inside of the spacecraft on the lower left. It looks different than the Russian rocket, but they're different designs to accomplish similar goals of getting people safely to space. And this particular capsule does land in the water. They landed just off the coast of Pensacola in the Gulf of Mexico. And exciting thing about that, it was the first time that a human had landed from space in the water since the Apollo program, since Apollo Soyuz back in the 70s.
I actually have a question for you, Ansley, from one of our viewers. Let me get it up. Question for Ansley. Have you ever oops, hold on a second, get it back. Have you ever wanted to be able to fly to space in any of the space shuttles? If yes, why have you not?
Thanks for the question. So I will say when I was a kid, I was definitely interested in being an astronaut. It's really what inspired me to want to go into a technical field to start with. I read a biography of Neil Armstrong when I was a kid in 2nd grade. But then I found out about all the cool things done here on the ground to help fly people in space. And I decided I really wanted to get into that. I wanted to work in mission control and help fly the people in space. So I've never applied to the astronaut program, but I think certainly flying in space in any of these capsules would be incredible. I do like the idea of getting to space station where there's a little more room to spread out. Like Phil was saying, the launches, both on the Soyuz and on some of our other rockets are tight quarters. But being able to do a spin in space would absolutely be awesome.
And Bill mentioned that initially, all of the astronauts were military personnel. But on Wednesday, I spoke with Ricky Arnold, one of the more recent astronauts, and he was a teacher. And then he decided that this was his calling, and he's been to space twice.
That's right. We started out with military pilots as astronauts since they were considered test vehicles to start with. And military test pilots certainly knew what that was like to test out new aircraft, which translated to testing out new spacecraft. We do still have some astronauts from the military, but we have astronauts from lots of different backgrounds, all different types of scientists and researchers and investigators, engineers, all sorts of different backgrounds. The basic requirement to be an astronaut is a bachelor's degree in a technical field, but certainly it's a competitive arena. So many of them have higher level degrees in different technical areas, and again, lots of experience with research in unique places.
And I believe there's been a few physicians that have been astronauts.
Absolutely. and several physicians that have flown on the space station, long duration missions. So yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, that is lunar missions and missions to Mars. They, almost every mission, they always say they're going to take a doctor along because somebody's got to take care of the other astronauts in case they get sick or hurt. So having a doctor in space is extremely important. And with that, I want to ask Ainsley a question. Did you, when you were considering going or being an astronaut, had you looked into all the changes that happen to the human body when it is in orbit? Because I'm human factors, and I think about how the body works and how it interacts, and all of a sudden, whether you're in space or at the bottom of the ocean, your environment is changed, and that change actually affects how your body operates. And so I'll toss that out to Ainsley. Did you know about that, or what did you think when you learned about all the changes to the body?
So I'll admit, I hadn't really thought about being an astronaut since I was little, so I wasn't really taking that into account. But you are absolutely right. When you get into space, lots of things happen to your body. You don't have the weight, Earth's gravity pulling down on you, so astronauts actually grow a couple inches in space. Unfortunately, it doesn't last when their spine expands, so they grow a couple inches. But when they come back to Earth, of course, gravity is pulling back down again. But also, all of the fluid in your body that normally is circulating a certain way, again, being pulled down by gravity, when you get space, that kind of all floats up. So a lot of times when you see pictures of astronauts in space, their faces look a lot fuller because all of that liquid is floating to the top. And sometimes they talk about feeling a little congested. Again, the fluid in your nasal passages floating up a little bit and feel like you kind of got a stuffy head. And then also something that's been noticed more recently during these long duration missions on space station after the past several years are changes in eyesight. And that's something that we're still studying and researching. So the shape, again, without the gravity pulling down, the shape of your eyeball kind of changes just enough to sometimes, for some astronauts, affect their vision. So there are certainly lots of changes that happen.
Yeah. Well, you said the research is still going on, but does it improve their vision or does it make it worse? We don't know yet.
So it changes it. So it depends. But some astronauts, you'll see them wearing glasses in space and they don't wear them on the ground. And that's, again, in some respects due to some of the changes that happen.
Is there any research, or has there been any notes about whether it changes their hearing?
I haven't heard about that, so I'm not sure. It's a good question.
Okay. Well, yes, I dreamed about an astronaut too until I realized that they're not going to accept someone into the program that's afraid of heights. So. Yes. There is one other thing I wanted to show you guys on the space station front. So you can actually see the International Space Station from the ground. If it's clear outside, if there aren't clouds, as the space station flies around the Earth, when it is lit in space, but it's dark on the ground, the sunlight actually reflects off those solar arrays and the metal components of the space station. You can see it on Earth. So this picture on the right is a picture I actually took outside one night several months ago when space station was flying over, and this little dot, it's actually a line because that's a space station flying over. It's one of the brightest things in the night sky, and it looks like a bright light moving in a straight line, and it doesn't flash. There are no lights on the space station that flash or twinkle like stars or like airplanes flying over. So if you go to this website, spotthestation.nasa.gov, that's fed with data, trajectory data that comes straight from mission control, and it calculates, you can enter your city and it'll calculate when the space station is going to fly over. So I picked Annapolis, Maryland for this to see when the space station was going to fly over, and there's actually a sighting early tomorrow morning. So if anyone's up super early, you should, and if it's clear, of course, make sure there's no clouds, you can look up and see the space station flying over. So again, I picked Annapolis. It's going to be basically the same time anywhere across Maryland. But the way you can read this, it'll appear over the southwest. So if you look to the southwest direction,
At 6:16, you'll see a bright light come over the horizon, might be a little higher up in the sky. That max height is how high from the horizon you look, the angle from the horizon you look up, it'll get that high in the sky. So that doesn't look like it's directly overhead, but it flies pretty high overhead. Be about a 5-minute pass, and then it will disappear towards the northeast. So again, if the skies are clear in Maryland tomorrow and you're up early, 6:16, go outside and take a look.
Someone asked the question, what would you recommend to a person that would like to be an astronaut, and what sort of activities or what career path should they take?
That's a great question. So first off, I would encourage you to pursue a technical field. So again, engineering, math, science. But I would encourage you to pick something you really like, something you're interested in. I think Bill mentioned earlier being a curious person, and I think curiosity is definitely the driver of innovation and opportunities. I certainly in my career, asking questions, showing interest in things has led to opportunities I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So someone pursuing something that's a technical field, if you like to do things, explore different areas. So we've had astronauts that have come from doing research in Antarctica or studying caves, different unique areas, pursuing things that you're interested in that are unique, that you have the ability to shine and enjoy. And if you get that opportunity, then certainly that's icing on the cake.
Yeah, and it depends on what kind of astronaut. There are people who want to go up to the space station and do research. So you might think, well, I'm interested in plants. Well, they grow plants on the space station. And for astronauts going to Mars, geology is going to be a huge need. They're going to need specialists. So, as you think about your technical field also, and Ainsley mentioned your interest, you got to have passion in whatever you do. But if you have an interest that will help exploration, whether you're a doctor, botanist, and I'm sure everybody's seen the movie The Martian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he turned out to be, into plants, but they took him to Mars because they needed somebody to study how plants grow on Mars. So just because you're interested in something, think of how that might apply to either the moon or Mars or science on the space station. You don't just have to be a pilot or focused on astronaut. Most astronauts now, they call payload specialists because they focus on a type of science. So anything is open. So do your research and find out what astronauts do now and will be doing in the future.
Mm-hmm. Ainsley's comments about the physiological changes of astronauts in space reminded me of something that's important in design, is designing space or equipment for the astronauts to exercise, to keep themselves active and to minimize the changes of space. Would you like to talk about that, both of you, for a moment?
I'll chime in because I deal with the Aerospace Medical Association, and we had actually the Russian I forget their directorate, but they're people in charge of countermeasures. And countermeasures mean they're countering what the effects of space and what they're doing to stop that. And Ainsley mentioned the fluid shifts. Believe it or not, because your fluid shifts, your body says, oh, I've got too many red blood cells. So it actually causes anemia. So that gets rid of red blood cells. And then it says, oh, I'm out of balance. I've got too many white blood cells. And so it compromises your immune system by getting rid of those. And so it's a cascade. Your bones start to demineralize because you don't have the weight. When you walk around, your legs and muscles are actually imparting forces on your bones, and your bones stay strong because of that. Once you go into space, your body says, hey, I don't have to support this weight. Let's get rid of all of this heavy material in the bones. And so you start to get rid of calcium. And so it's this huge waterfall effect. Well, to counteract that, there's exercise regimens. And the Russians, they may have adjusted it, but they used to work out so much more than the US, because back in the days of Mir, the Russian station, they would leave their astronauts up there for a long time. We're talking year or longer, and they were really worried about their health. So they would have them work out. We're talking 3+ hours a day, sometime, in shifts. The US has a workout regimen where they've got exercise bikes, treadmills, and you think, how do you use a treadmill in space? Well, they actually put a belt around their waist and they bungee cord themselves down to hold themselves on the treadmill. And of course, with the exercise bike, they strap themselves in so they can actually exert force. Years ago, back before stations, the Russians actually had, and I forgot the name of the suit, but it was nothing but a suit that constricted you. It had bungee cords that held your legs and your arms, and you were constantly fighting against it. The Russians have really innovative things to exercise, but the US has more pleasant methods of exercising. But the interesting thing about the exercising, if you notice, if you go on YouTube and look at the NASA YouTube videos on how to live and work in space, they're unbelievably interesting. I would recommend that you can spend hours by all the different astronauts talking about all the things they do on the space station. But if you watch them exercise, it's funny, you watch their hair fly out and beads of sweat just start drifting off their body. But a lot of times they monitor them physiologically so they can check to make sure that their lungs and their heart and all their body parts are getting exercised and are staying in shape. I'll let Ansley chime in if I missed anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So now the routine for the astronauts on the space station, they actually work out 2 hours every single day. And it's about an hour of cardio, either on the treadmill or the stationary bicycle. And then an hour of, I'll call it weightlifting in quotes. So there actually is a device called the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, ARED, and it uses the concept of resistance to exercise your muscles. So if you think about like a rubber band, if you pull a rubber band, your muscles feel that. It's a similar concept, not using rubber bands, but using vacuum to create some resistance. And this really specialized device, it's really cool. It allows them to do all sorts of different exercises. You can do push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, squats, so on and so forth. And the astronauts work with specially trained health experts on the ground to figure out exactly how they should be exercising every day, so that when they come back to Earth after however long, 4 to 6 months, sometimes longer, they're able to be healthy and maintain their bone strength and muscle mass so that they're safe when they get home. I actually talked to one astronaut who said he worked out so much on the space station, he came back stronger than he did before he left.
That's amazing.
So again, back to the concept of design in space, thinking about, one of the things that goes into design is solving problems. Yeah. So you're going to be on the space station for 6 months, like Bill was saying, that's going to affect how your body reacts. So what can we do to help prevent bone loss and muscle mass, which led to these different types of exercise equipment.
Amazing. Bill has a little video that we're going to show. Let me get to it. And Bill, you want to key up the video?
Okay, this basically shows Lockheed Martin is helping NASA with the Orion spacecraft. And to help the people putting pieces together, we're using augmented reality, which allows, as I mentioned before, instead of having shop manuals and instructions, you just put on an glasses that project exactly what you're supposed to do. So you have CAD models, translucent CAD models that are projected in front of you, and the instructions in text are off to the side so that you can see it, so you don't have to look away, look at the paper or the computer screen, then look back. You can stay focused, and you don't have to learn because the augmented reality shows you exactly how to put the next piece on. What you're going to see is technicians putting Orion seats, the seats that the astronauts will ride in, that shows them putting them together. Go ahead. Is there no sound? Okay, and what I find the most beneficial aspect of augmented reality is you, I don't know if you had, if those watching could actually read while the video was going on, but we have had zero human error. And that has always been one of the problems, you know, throughout mankind, is people make mistakes. And with augmented reality, because it shows you exactly what the engineer who thought of the design and how to put it together, the augmented reality tells the technician or the astronaut in space or whoever's using it exactly how to do it. The reduction in mistakes has gone to almost zero. And people are always going to make mistakes, but so far we found augmented reality really helps reduce that probability of errors. So chances are you could give somebody, you know, whether it's a technician in a factory or an astronaut in space, you can give them a pile of parts in the augmented reality glasses with the instructions, and they'll be able to put it together right the first time. So we're really excited about that. And I know NASA's I don't know if they're doing it on ISS yet, but I can almost guarantee that they will.
Pretty amazing. Well, Bill and Ansley, thank you very much for joining us today. This was, I found, an outstanding program, and I'm sure that some of the students who watch this will be inspired to enter space and think about space and hopefully become part of the space program. So I'd like to, you still there, Ansley? I can't see you.
I'm here.
Okay. Well, again,
Thanks so
thank
much.
you.
It's been really fun talking with you guys today.
It has been. So both of you have a great rest of the day. And for those of you, please participate as many of the remaining STEM Festival events as you can. And have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.